The Ottoman-Habsburg Wars were fought from the 16th through the 18th centuries between the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg Empire, which was at times supported by the Holy Roman Empire, Kingdom of Hungary and Habsburg Spain. The wars were dominated by land campaigns in Hungary and Croatia. By the 16th century, the Ottomans had become a serious threat to the European powers, with Ottoman ships sweeping away Venetian possessions in the Aegean and Ionia and Ottoman-supported Barbary pirates seizing Spanish possessions in the Maghreb. The Protestant Reformation, the France-Habsburg rivalry and the numerous civil conflicts of the Holy Roman Empire served as distractions to the Christians from their conflict with the Ottomans. Meanwhile, the Ottomans had to contend with the Persian Safavid Empire and to a lesser extent the Mamluk Sultanate, which was defeated and fully incorporated into the empire. Initially, Ottoman conquests in Europe made significant gains with a decisive victory at Mohacs, reducing around one-third part of Kingdom of Hungary to the status of an Ottoman tributary. Later, the Peace of Westphalia and the Spanish War of Succession in the 17th and 18th centuries respectively left the Austrian Empire as the sole firm possession of the House of Habsburg. By then, however, European advances in guns and military tactics outweighed the skill and resources of the Ottomans and their elite janissaries, enabling the Habsburgs to retake Hungary. The Great Turkish War ended with 3 decisive Holy League victories at Vienna, Mohacs and Zenta. The wars came to an end following Austria's participation in the War of 1787 to 1791, which Austria fought in alliance with Russia. Intermittent tension between Austria and the Ottoman Empire continued throughout the 19th century, but they never again fought each other in a war and ultimately found themselves allied in World War I, in the aftermath of which both empires were dissolved. Origins. The origins of the wars are clouded by the fact that although the Habsburgs were occasionally the kings of Hungary and emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, the wars between the Hungarians and the Ottomans included other dynasties as well. Naturally, the Ottoman wars in Europe attracted support from the West, where the advancing and powerful Islamic State was seen as a threat to Christendom in Europe. The Crusades of Nicopolis and Havana marked the most determined attempts by Europe to halt the Turkic advance into Central Europe and the Balkans. For a while the Ottomans were too busy trying to put down Balkan rebels such as Vlad Dracula. However, the defeat of these and other rebellious vassal states opened up Central Europe to Ottoman invasion. The Kingdom of Hungary now bordered the Ottoman Empire and its vassals. After King Louis II of Hungary was killed at the Battle of Mohacs, his widow Queen Mary fled to her brother the Archduke of Austria, Ferdinand I. Ferdinand's claim to the throne of Hungary was further strengthened by the fact that he had married Anne, the sister of King Louis II and the only family member claimant to the throne of the shattered kingdom. Consequently, Ferdinand I was elected King of Bohemia, and at the Diet of Pozsony he and his wife were elected King and Queen of Hungary. This clashed with the Turkish objective of placing the puppet John Szapolyai on the throne, thus setting the stage for a conflict between the two powers. Habsburg advance. Ferdinand I attacked Hungary, a state severely weakened by civil conflict, in 1527, in an attempt to drive out John Szapolyai and enforce his authority there. John was unable to prevent Ferdinand's campaigning, which saw the capture of Buda and several other key settlements along the Danube. Despite this, the Ottoman Sultan was slow to react and only came to the aid of his vassal when he launched a huge army of about 120,000 men on 10 May 1529. Habsburg monarchs needed the economic power of Hungary for the Ottoman wars. During the Ottoman wars, the territory of former Kingdom of Hungary shrunken by around 70%. Despite of these enormous territorial and demographic losses, the smaller, heavily war-torn Royal Hungary has remained economically more important than Austria or Kingdom of Bohemia even at the end of 16th century. Out of all his countries, the territorially shrinked, war-torn Kingdom of Hungary was, at that time, Ferdinand's largest source of revenue. Siege of Vienna. The Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, easily wrestled from Ferdinand most of the gains he had achieved in the previous 2 years, to the disappointment of Ferdinand I. Only the fortress of Bratislava resisted. Considering the size of Suleiman's army and the devastation wrought upon Hungary in the previous few years, it is not surprising that the will to resist one of the world's most powerful states was lacking in many of the recently garrisoned Habsburg settlements. The Sultan arrived at Vienna on the 27th of September the same year. Ferdinand's army was some 16,000 strong. He was outnumbered roughly 7-1, and the walls of Vienna were an invitation to Ottoman cannon. However, the heavy cannons on which the Ottomans relied to breach the walls were all abandoned on the way to Vienna, after they got stuck in mud due to heavy rainfall. Ferdinand defended Vienna with great vigor. By October 12, after much mining and countermining, an Ottoman war council was called, and on October 14 the Ottomans abandoned the siege. The retreat of the Ottoman army was hampered by the resistance of Bratislava, which once more bombarded the Ottomans. Early snowfall made matters worse, and it would be another 3 years before Suleiman could campaign in Hungary Little War. After the defeat at Vienna, the Ottoman Sultan had to turn his attention to other parts of his impressive domain. Taking advantage of this absence, Archduke Ferdinand launched an offensive in 1530, recapturing Gran and other forts. An assault on Buda was only thwarted by the presence of Ottoman Turkish soldiers. Much like the previous Austrian offensive, the return of the Ottomans forced the Habsburgs in Austria to go on the defensive once more. In 1532 Suleiman sent a massive Ottoman army to take Vienna. However, the army took a different route to Kossuth. After a defense by a mere 700-strong defensive force led by the Croatian Earl Miklos Jurisic, the defenders accepted an honorable surrender of the fortress in return for their safety. After this, the Sultan withdrew, content with his success and recognizing the limited Austrian gains in Hungary, whilst at the same time forcing Ferdinand to recognize John Szapolyai as King of Hungary. Whilst the peace between the Austrians and the Ottomans would last for 9 years, John Szapolyai and Ferdinand found it convenient to continue skirmishes along their respective borders. In 1537 Ferdinand broke the peace treaty by sending his ablest generals to a disastrous siege of Osijek, which saw another Ottoman triumph. Even so, by the Treaty of Nagyvarad, Ferdinand was recognized as the heir of the Kingdom of Hungary. The death of John Szapolyai in 1540 saw Ferdinand's inheritance robbed. It was instead given to John's son John II Sigismund. Attempting to enforce the treaty, the Austrians advanced on Buda, where they experienced another defeat by Suleiman. The elderly Austrian general Roggendorf proved to be incompetent. Suleiman then finished off the remaining Austrian troops and proceeded to de facto annex Hungary. By the time a peace treaty was enforced in 1551, Habsburg Hungary had been reduced to little more than borderland. In 1552 the forces of the Ottoman Empire led by Kara Ahmed Pasha laid siege on the castle of Eger, located in the northern part of the Kingdom of Hungary, but the defenders led by Istvan Dobbo repelled the attacks and defended the castle of Eger. The siege of Eger became an emblem of national defense and patriotic heroism in Hungary. After the seizure of Buda by the Turks in 1541, the West and North Hungary recognized a Habsburg as king, while the central and southern counties were occupied by the Sultan and the east became the Principality of Transylvania. The vast majority of the 17,000 and 19,000 Ottoman soldiers in service in the Ottoman fortresses in the territory of Hungary were Orthodox and Muslim Balkan Slavs instead of ethnic Turkish people. Southern Slavs were also acting as Akinjas and other light troops intended for pillaging in the territory of present-day Hungary. The Little War saw wasted opportunities on both sides. Austrian attempts to increase their influence in Hungary were just as unsuccessful as the Ottoman drives to Vienna. Nonetheless, there were no illusions as to the status quo. The Ottoman Empire was still a very powerful and dangerous threat. Even so, the Austrians would go on the offensive again, their generals building a bloody reputation for so much loss of life. Costly battles like those fought at Buda and Osijek were to be avoided, but not absent in the upcoming conflicts. In any case, Habsburg interests were split three-way between fighting for a devastated European land under Islamic control, trying to stop the gradual decentralization of imperial authority in Germany, and Spain's ambitions in North Africa, the Low Countries, and against the French. Having said this, the Ottomans, whilst hanging on to their supreme power, could not expand upon it as much as they did in the days of Mehmet and Bayezid. Whilst the nadir of the empire had yet to come, its stagnation would be characterized by the same campaigning that led to little real expansion. To the east lay further wars against their Shiite opponents, the Safavids. Suleiman the Magnificent led one final campaign in 1566, ending at the siege of Sajitvar. The siege was meant to be only a temporary stop before taking on Vienna. However, the fortress withstood against the Sultan's armies. Eventually the Sultan, already an old man at 72 years, died. The royal physician was strangled to prevent news from reaching the troops, and the unaware Ottomans took the fort, ending the campaign shortly afterward without making a move against Vienna. War in the Mediterranean. 1480 to 1540. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire rapidly began displacing her Christian opponents at sea. In the 14th century, the Ottomans had only a small navy. By the 15th century, hundreds of ships were in the Ottoman arsenal, taking on Constantinople and challenging the naval powers of the Italian republics of Venice and Genoa. In 1480, the Ottomans unsuccessfully laid siege to Rhodes Island, the stronghold of the Knights of St. John. When the Ottomans returned in 1522, they were more successful, and the Christian powers lost a crucial naval base. In retaliation, Charles V led a massive Holy League of 60,000 soldiers against the Ottoman city of Tunis. After Hayreddin Barbarossa's fleet was defeated by a Genoan one, Charles's army put 30,000 of the city's residents to the sword. Afterwards, the Spanish placed a friendlier Muslim leader in power. The campaign was not an unmitigated success. Many Holy League soldiers succumbed to dysentery, only natural for such a large overseas army. Furthermore, much of Barbarossa's fleet was not present in North Africa, and the Ottomans won a victory against the Holy League in 1538 at the Battle of Preveza. Siege of Malta. Despite the loss of Rhodes, Cyprus, an island further from Europe than Rhodes, remained Venetian. When the Knights of St. John moved to Malta, the Ottomans found that their victory at Rhodes only displaced the problem. Ottoman ships came under frequent attacks by the Knights, as they attempted to stop Ottoman expansion to the west. Not to be outdone, Ottoman ships struck many parts of southern Europe and around Italy, as part of their wider war with France against the Habsburgs. The presence of the Ottoman fleet so close to the papacy alarmed the Spanish, who began assembling first a small expeditionary force and then a larger fleet to relieve the island. The ultra-modern star-shaped fort of St. Elmo was taken only with heavy casualties, including the Ottoman general Turgut Reis, and the rest of the island was too much. Even so, Barbary piracy continued, and the victory at Malta had no effect on Ottoman military strength in the Mediterranean. Cyprus and Lepanto. The death of Suleiman the Magnificent in 1566 brought Selim II to power. Known by some as Selim the Sot, he assembled a massive expedition to take Cyprus from the Venetians, an island far closer to Ottoman-controlled Middle East than to Venice. The other military option that Selim opted out of was to assist the Moorish rebellion that had been instigated by the Spanish crown to root out disloyal Moors. Had Selim succeeded in landing in the Iberian Peninsula, he may have been cut off. For after he had captured Cyprus in 1571, he suffered a decisive naval defeat at Lepanto. The Holy League, assembled by the Pope to defend the island, arrived too late to save it, but having collected so much of Europe's available military strength, sought to inflict a blow on the Ottomans, which with better supplied ammunition and armor they did. The chance to retake Cyprus was wasted in the typical squabbling that followed the victory. So that where the Venetians signed a peace treaty with the Ottomans in 1573, they did so according to Ottoman terms. 13 Years' War 1593–1606. After Suleiman's death in 1566, Selim II posed less of a threat to Europe. Though Cyprus was captured at long last, the Ottomans failed against the Habsburgs at sea. Selim died not too long after, leaving his son Murad III. A hedonist and a total womanizer, Murad spent more time at his harem than at the war front. Under such deteriorating circumstances, the empire found itself at war with the Austrians yet again. In the early stages of the war, the military situation for the Ottomans worsened as the principalities of Wallachia, Moldova and Transylvania each had new rulers who renounced their vassalship to the Ottomans. At the Battle of Sisak, a group of Ghazis sent to raid the insubordinate lands in Croatia were thoroughly defeated by tough imperial troops fresh from savage fighting in the Low Countries. In response to this defeat, the Grand Vizier launched a large army of 13,000 Janissaries plus numerous European levies against the Christians. When the Janissaries rebelled against the Vizier's demands for a winter campaign, the Ottomans had captured little other than Vzprem. 1594 saw a more fruitful Ottoman response. An even larger army was assembled by the Grand Vizier Sanar Pasha. In the face of this threat, the Austrians abandoned a siege of Gran, a fortress that had fallen in Suleiman's career and then lost Raab. For the Austrians, their only comfort in the year came when the fortress of Kamano held out long enough against the Vizier's forces to retreat for the winter. Despite the previous year's success, the situation for the Ottomans worsened yet again in 1595. A Christian coalition of the former vassal states along with Austrian troops recaptured Gran and marched southward down the Danube. Michael the Brave, the Prince of Wallachia, started a campaign against the Turks, conquering several castles near the lower Danube, including Georgia, Brela, Harsova, and Silistra, while his Moldavian allies defeated the Turks in Iasi and other parts of Moldavia. Michael continued his attacks deep within the Ottoman Empire, taking the forts of Nicopolish, Ribnik, and Chilia and even reaching as far as Adrianople. At one point his forces reached Edirne, the former Ottoman capital city. No Christian army had set foot in the region since the days of the Byzantine Empire under the Paleologoi. Following the defeat of the Ottoman army in Wallachia and the series of unsuccessful confrontations with the Habsburgs, alarmed by the success and proximity of the threat, the new Sultan Mehmed III strangled his 19 brothers to seize power and personally marched his army to the northwest of Hungary to counter his enemies' moves. In 1596 Aga fell to the Ottomans. At the decisive Battle of Karistis, a slow Austrian response was wiped out by the Ottomans. Mehmet III's inexperience in ruling showed when he failed to reward the Janissaries for their efforts in battle. Rather, he punished them for not fighting well enough and thereby incited a rebellion. Karistis was a bloodbath for the Christian armies. Thus, it is surprising to note that the Austrians renewed the war against their enemies in the summer of 1597 with a drive southward. taking Papa, Tata, Rab and Veszprem. Further Habsburg victories were achieved when the Turkish relief force was defeated at Grosswardein. Enraged by these defeats, the Turks replied with a more energetic response, so that by 1605, after much wasted Austrian relief efforts and failed sieges on both sides, only Rab remained in the hands of the Austrians. In that year a pro-Turkish vassal prince was elected leader of Transylvania by the Hungarian nobles, and the war came to a conclusion with the Peace of Szekvatoric. Conquest of Crete. The Knights of Malta, emboldened by declining Turkish offensive power, began attacking Turkish ships in the Mediterranean. The Turks retaliated by besieging Candia on Crete in 1648. The Venetians were left to defend their last major Aegean island alone. As Austria was still recovering from the devastation of the 30 Years' War and Spain remained defiant against the French. Since the darker days for Venice of the 16th century, the Venetian fleet was a more potent force, defeating the Turks in their attempts to take the island. So long as the Venetians had naval supremacy, the Ottomans could do little on land at Crete, and the blockade established by Venice at the Dardanelles was more than a serious humiliation. Within 10 years the Spanish had signed a peace treaty with the French in 1659, and war with Austria resumed in the later 1660s. With the war going slow and the Austrians, Spanish and Venetians operating with the initiative, the Grand Vizier seized power in the name of the Sultan and conducted a far more rigorous effort. Though beaten by the Austrians, the Ottomans concluded a favourable peace in 1664, and the Venetians were finally defeated at sea, ending the embarrassing blockade at the Dardanelles, so close to the Ottoman capital. The island fell after many years of siege, thanks to the skillful resources of the Grand Vizier, his organization of an army misused for many years, and the French attacks on Austria, which forced her to postpone any offensives into Hungary.